Good morning. As President Stone would then follow. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. Look, first, before we begin, let me start by saying let's thank the law review and our speakers, all of you for coming out today for this really important event. So thanks, everybody. I think that the law review has chosen a topic that has growing, is vital at the beginning, has growing importance in our current society. So this is really a timely topic, and I'm really appreciative that you guys are doing it. Education is becoming an institution that's ever more reliant upon purportedly objective measures of ability and of success. And that, I am seeing, is effectively working to shut out diverse students from higher education. At the same time, we live in a world in which our willingness to pay to prepare students for complexities of the modern world is going down, and good jobs are getting harder and harder to get without it. The rich and the middle class can send their children to private schools. Our legislatures create districts that have carve-out rich areas so that the poor rely upon their lower incomes to pay for their schools. And the rich don't send their children to those schools. And as a result, the poor, the black, Hispanic, the disabled are being continually pushed out of education in many ways. And while our federal government is supposed to provide aid to those with physical disabilities and mental disabilities, elected and appointed officials are talking about how that's really not something that the federal government should require states to do, that that's just up to people to do, as if that's okay. Now, I think that this places our society at great moral and economic risk. A proper education is a fundamental right, in my opinion, for everyone. And when we undermine that right, we act immorally. And education is also the key to exiting and avoiding poverty. When we limit access to education, we consign more and more people to poverty, and we never, ever let them get out of it. And we have a very distinguished panel today of speakers who are going to speak about these issues, and I think that's going to really be very informative for everybody, and I hope that you find it very interesting. But before I turn the podium back over to Ms. Heath, I just want to talk about why diversity in all of its forms matters to me, especially in education. Now, as you may not know, and despite all appearances to the contrary, I'm a middle-class white man. So it's a little difficult sometimes to talk about these topics because I'm sort of in that privileged position. So all of you know, if you have classes with me, I always joke about how I drive down the 202 very fast and yet have not had a ticket in 10 years, right? Yet I see many people pulled over, none of whom look like me. And some of you may have also heard this story, but I think it's always worth repeating. When my father was young, Italians suffered under bias in education, as did many people from different parts of Europe. Now, at the same time, African Americans, Hispanics, Asians all suffered that. But as I am the son of an Italian man, I have that information. When he was in school, he was never offered the opportunity to go to the smart kids classes. He was told he must go to vocational classes. And so when he graduated from high school, they had none of the requirements to go to college. And my father wanted to go to college. He wanted to be a mathematician. And lo and behold, he was not permitted to, and instead he was a noble occupation, made to be a carpenter. And so he went around being a carpenter for a while until he became injured on the job and disabled. He was then given the opportunity to either remain on disability for the rest of his life or to go back to school. And he chose to go back to school. But the bias hadn't stopped yet. He went into school, and at that time to go to the school, you needed to see a psychiatrist who would measure your IQ, see if you're smart enough, because IQ is an objective measure, right? It's objective, but your IQ, well, you're sorry, you're not smart enough. Your IQ is not smart enough. And my father failed the IQ test and was told he was not going to be able to go to college. The good news is my father was actually a relatively smart man and had taken a bunch of pre-college classes to make up for do all those things he never learned in college. If you don't have calculus, you're going to have to take algebra, trigonometry, pre-calc, and count. So he had done all that. And he had straight A's in all of those classes. So he turned to the psychiatrist and he said, well, if I'm not smart enough to go to college, why do I have straight A's in all of these classes? And so they let him in. But not because he was smart enough, because he wasn't, right? He was Italian. They're not smart people. So he was blocked. I've also seen discrimination and a lack of access in terms of ableness as it raises its ugly head. And when I was young, my mother developed multiple sclerosis. As a consequence, she went from being a very physically vibrant person to someone who, while mentally and physically vibrant in a different way, was in a wheelchair. This is in the days when there were no rights to access, no Americans with Disability Act. And so when my mother was trying to go to work and had to hobble down the stairs to the subway, she literally had to hold on and pray that she didn't fall down these stairs because there was no access. And I distinctly remember people talking about curb cuts. Do you all know what curb cuts are? You know, you're walking down the street, you come to the corner, and instead of it being this thing that you fall off, it's got a little cut in it, it's smooth transition down. That's so that people who need that can go straight along. Well, I remember hearing discussions about, why should we do that? Why don't they just go up in the driveway, come along the street, and go up the other side? Why should we spend money on that? That'll make the sidewalk wear fast. That'll be too expensive. Now, the good news is people figured out that that was a very stupid idea. And as a result, we now have things like curb cuts. So I've seen it in my own life where access is vital to help. And I'll be perfectly honest, my mother's life was very different than the life of people today who are in wheelchairs or have limited mobility. Her mobility was dramatically limited, and as a result, her life was in many ways limited. And that was a terrible, terrible tragedy. And while today is about education, it might take a moment to talk a little bit about access to the courts. Now, I'm fortunate in that I do fun, exciting, quantitative, analytic research as my area, which none of you want to read, of course. But one of the papers I'm working on with my friend Andy Juris from Drake University is talking about people's willingness to go to the courts. So wouldn't you all think that everybody has access to the state courts, right? Yes, why not just file in the state courts? Well, our research is indicating that if you go to former Jim Crow education states, so states where they mandated segregation on the basis of race, and you look at people's willingness to file in state courts as opposed to federal courts, surprisingly, African Americans prefer federal courts. So for example, if you remember from your civil procedure class, the amount of controversy has gone up a couple of times in the last few years. And the whole purpose of that is to keep people out of the federal courts. But the data indicates that in these states, guys that look like me step away from the federal courts when those amounts go up. But African Americans continue and actually increase the amount they go to those federal courts. Well, why? Isn't access to the courts objective? Aren't you treated equally? Isn't access the same in the courts? Well, we will be arguing that that's not true. But in fact, what we have here is clear empirical evidence to indicate that some folks have a fear that they will not be treated equally in the state courts. And this is a consistent problem. It's not merely with amount of controversy. So, access to the courts, just like access to education, is a public good. When we don't give people access, that failure to allow them access, either it just diminishes us all. It diminishes every one of us. And this should be obvious, that failure to have access diminishes every single one of us. And our speakers today will discuss that it's the case that there isn't equal access. And what I would ask each of us to do today is to listen and to think. And if we do, we may find that our sense of moral justice will cause us to work together to open doors that are now shut. and fulfill that description of America as a shining city upon the hill, in which all are welcome and all are treated with respect, dignity, and fairness. Thank you. And let me turn the podium over to Ms. Heath. Thanks, everyone.
Everybody for coming, and thank you, Dean Devito, for speaking. I think today will be informational and educational. Thank you to our moderator and our speakers and our panelists for participating in this event, and Florida Coastal for getting the law review an opportunity to host it. If anybody is here for CLE credit, you can see Ms. Elise or Mr. Baya over there. They'll give you a reference number, or you can get it as you go out at the registration desk. I've been fortunate to have some of the best mentors during my time as a law student, but Katie Barker has been one of my favorites. She is an assistant district attorney in the Brunswick Judicial Circuit in South Georgia, and she's a 2006 graduate from Florida Coastal. During her law school career, Katie was awarded the Jerome Curran Award for Distinguished Public Service and went on to work in the public sector as a criminal prosecutor. After 10 years of prosecutorial experience, she now serves as a lead prosecutor in her circuit for crimes against women and children, including medically complex homicide, sexual and physical abuse cases. She serves as a supervising mentor to new prosecutors in her circuit and assists them in developing new strategies for prosecuting historically under-prosecuted offenses, such as domestic violence with uncooperative victims and child molestation offenses with significantly delayed disclosures. Katie was instrumental in drafting a child abuse protocol in her jurisdiction and frequently conducts training for law enforcement, educators, and hospital staff on how to respond to disclosures. She also serves on a multidisciplinary team and the Child Fatality Review Board. Both committees are dedicated to abuse prevention and increasing the efficiency of services to the vulnerable victim population. I've had an opportunity to watch Katie argue for victims who did not have a benefit of having a protector in their corner. She is brilliant and passionate. She's a good teacher and she's invested in her cause, which makes her a wonderful example of what a good attorney can provide for a community. I'm happy she agreed to be the moderator for today's event, and I'm going to turn it over to Katie Barker.
Thank you. That was very nice, Christy. I have had the pleasure of supervising her in her externship at our office, and don't tell our new attorneys that I say this, but she exceeds the ability of most of our new attorneys, and I'm excited to see what is coming her way in the future. I did go to Florida Coastal, and I've been an attorney now for about 10 years, so I'm a little far removed. I was there when we were at the campus on Beach Boulevard in the dirt parking lot, and so this school has come a long way since then. I'm a criminal prosecutor, so my role here is not necessarily to speak on these issues, but it certainly is important because things like education and lack of education and poverty is one of the #1 indicators that lead to criminality and lead people to criminal courts where they encounter us. So I'm happy to be here, and I understand that my #1 task here is to keep us on task and on time, and we're already a little bit behind, so I'm going to jump right in and introduce our first presenter, Professor Erica Curran. Erica Curran is a clinical professor and director of experiential programs here at Florida Coastal. She runs the Immigrant and Human Rights Clinic, which focuses on representation of immigrant victims of violent crime. She also teaches immigration law and international human rights. She has previously worked at the Jacksonville Area Legal Aid as a staff attorney in the Refugee Immigration Project. She served on the board of directors for the American Immigration Lawyers Association of Central Florida. Prior to her work as an attorney, she ran a domestic violence shelter and a legal advocacy program for immigrant women. She earned her Bachelor of Arts degree from Evergreen State College and her JD from Seattle University. please help me in welcoming Professor Curran.
Thank you, and congratulations to all of you and all of you for selecting this topic. I think it's much more timely than I even anticipated, particularly when the topic concerns immigrants. As I said to my students at the beginning of this semester, buckle up, because I have no idea what's going to be on the syllabus, because things are changing in ways I never anticipated. This Sunday is the 75th anniversary of an executive order. We've all heard recently about a few executive orders. Everyone has executive orders on their mind. But this Sunday, 75th anniversary, is the anniversary of the executive order that FDR ordered the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. So that's just something to set the tone for where we are and where we're going. One of the most interesting things to me about teaching law, teaching immigration in particular, is that immigration, we're a nation of immigrants, but we don't know very much about the law that incorporated this country and made us who we are and the fabric of who we are. Yesterday, nationally, was the Day Without Immigrants, a national campaign where a number of employers and businesses stayed home because they wanted to demonstrate what this country would be like without immigrants. And you know, there were 26.3 million foreign-born people working in the U.S. in 2015, making up 16.7% of the workforce. So it's a significant population if everyone actually did stay home yesterday. So what would education be like without immigrants? And what is education like without knowledge of our immigration past? Recently, I've been asked to speak in a number of venues on the media about the executive orders and what's going on with immigration currently. And one of the things that has currently been coming up constantly is the lack of foundational information we as a community have about our immigration law. I hear from a lot of people, why don't they just get in line? And why don't they apply lawfully for immigration status like my family did? And a lot of times I find that people really don't know what that means. For example, there really is not currently a line to get in. I was on NPR a couple of weeks ago, and a man called in and said, you know, my grandmother went through Ellis Island, and I just don't understand why they don't do that. Ellis Island is closed, and it's a museum, which is wonderful because it covers this history, this rich history of immigrants that we don't teach very much in our schools. It's not part of the regular curriculum, and it's not on the bar exam, unfortunately. Personally pushing for that. So a lot of people think that their family came here legally. Many people assume that their family immigrated to the United States or the right way. When many families arrived in the United States, particularly individuals of European ancestry, there were no numerical limitations on immigration, no requirements to have an existing family member or employment relationship with somebody in the country, and no requirement to obtain a visa prior to arriving. In most cases, the statement does not reflect that U.S. immigration system is very different in the past and that families might not have been allowed to enter had today's laws been in effect. So many people who are here today through descendants, through ancestors of immigrants, would not have been able to immigrate today. And I think that's a very important framework when we think about where we are and where we're going. Today's law requires that potential immigrants be closely related to qualified U.S. citizens or permanent residents, or have employment offers and certain levels of education, or qualify as refugees, which is an extensive process. Today's laws would have effectively restricted many of our families from coming legally to the United States. And until the late 19th century, there was really very little federal regulation on immigration. There really weren't laws to break, right? And a growing industrialized nation needed workers. We needed people to come. And immigration was encouraged and virtually unfettered, particularly if you were European, particularly if you were Northern European. And potential immigrants didn't have to get visas, they didn't have to go to consulates, and they didn't have to be screened. They would simply arrive at ports of entry such as Ellis Island, where they were inspected and allowed in. Prior to the 1920s, there were no numerical limitations on immigration, but certain persons were banned from immigrating. For example, the Chinese Exclusion Act, passed in 1882, restricted Chinese workers from immigration, and it wasn't repealed until 1943. So if we think about who we are, we have to think about the architecture of who we let in and where we did that. And the vast majority of people who arrived at a port of entry were allowed to enter, and the Immigration Service only excluded, at that time, 1% of the 25 million immigrants from Europe who arrived between 1880 and World War I. Other laws also barred additional groups from entering, including prostitutes, paupers, polygamists, persons with dangerous and loathsome contagious diseases, persons likely to become a public charge, anarchists, radicals, communists, and socialists, and the illiterate. And some people, perhaps some of our ancestors, lied about their health and their political beliefs to get in, but were largely undetected. And every restriction that was generated in U.S. immigration history generated unauthorized immigration. Unauthorized immigration has been here for the long haul. I spoke with a colleague just the other day, and she had done research on her ancestry and said that her family had jumped ship and swam ashore 100 years ago to avoid inspection. A June 17, 1923 New York Times article reported that the Commissioner of Immigration had been trying for 2 years to stem the flow of immigrants from Central and Southern Europe and Africa and Asia as an accumulated. But instead, what they did with those many immigrants violating the laws at the time was they issued and granted an amnesty. We've been granting amnesties for immigrants for well over 100 years. Many European immigrants benefited from these amnesties. Between 1925 and 1965, 200,000 unauthorized European immigrants legalized their status through a registry act, which only required that they leave the United States voluntarily and re-enter legally with a visa, a touchback program, and then allowed immigration officials to suspend deportation in certain meritorious cases. So we have a history of amnesty, and we have a history of unauthorized immigration that goes back long and deep. And it's important when we're thinking about where we want to go in the future, that we have a little bit more knowledge about where we've been. Many people have heard about DACA, or documented, which became a legal term informally, refers to deferred action for childhood arrivals. These are kids that were brought to the United States while children, or young people brought as children to the United States who graduated from a U.S. high school or working on a GED and trying to go to college. This was one of the first immigration executive orders in the Obama administration, and it was created to allow this group of children to get some status because Congress had not acted. For many years, the DREAM Act had been proposed, a bill proposed, and had never come through. Each year, tens and thousands of undocumented immigrant students graduate from American high schools and embark on certain futures. This past week, I've received phone calls from all of our area universities and colleges from the DACA recipient students in our community who are very frightened about their future. An executive order isn't solid law, and a new administration can change it. And just this past week, an individual with DACA was arrested and detained by the immigration authorities. Most of the time, the individuals that have obtained DACA came here because their parents brought them or they came on their own. One case that we've had in the clinic involved an individual who came to the United States at the age of 5 months. His parents brought him here. They thought that they had adopted him lawfully, but like many Americans, didn't have access to proper legal counsel, and they made some mistakes in bringing their child to the United States. Mistakes that were not reversible and left their young son permanently undocumented. He didn't have access to legal services until right before the election and came to our clinic and wanted to apply for DACA, which is a very insecure thing to do. Raised in Jacksonville, graduated from the Jacksonville High School, and wants very much to go to college. He recently spoke up on national public radio and told his story in Jacksonville, split down the middle. I'm not going to play it for you today, but it's a really compelling story. He is very much standing openly now and telling his story because he feels like he has no other choice. But every day he encounters individuals who don't know his situation and make comments about being illegal in the United States. One interesting aspect about immigration law is that you don't have to have intent to unlawfully enter the United States. So at 5 months old, you cannot even crawl across the border, but you can be charged with unlawful entry and be deported because you didn't enter lawfully. And I find that most lawyers that I encounter who are not immigration attorneys find that particularly shocking. The other aspect of immigration law is that you don't have access to free counsel if you're low income. There are no public defenders, and this includes even children and mentally challenged individuals or disabled individuals. So everyone who goes through the immigration system only gets counsel if they in fact have the resources to provide, to pay for that, or a law school clinical program or a pro bono program represents them. The DACA policy protecting the children of undocumented immigrants who were brought to the U.S. in their youth, on its face, is its first test of the Trump administration when Immigration and Customs Enforcement arrested this recent Mexican migrant in Washington state. And the pro bono response has been tremendous recently. That's one positive in the past 2 months. I've always been involved in encouraging immigration attorneys to get involved in pro bono, and this was just a tremendous response. But it remains to be seen what will happen to Daniel Ramirez. He's 23, and he was arrested by immigration when they were doing an enforcement action involving his father. So we'll see. Under DACA, persons such as Ramirez, turned dreamers, brought to the country, were legally granted the right to work, and an estimated 750,000 people are protected. However, this is not solid because it is not an actual statute, it's just an executive order, and so this could disappear. And it remains to be seen if this individual or any of our other clients are going to be able to stay. And that is one of the reasons we're facing a crisis in our community locally. These students might be your law school colleagues, or they might be attorneys that you practice with. Florida Bar authorized individuals with DACA to be licensed to practice in Florida. So you may not know that you're interacting with someone who has DACA and faces losing it, but they're here, they're on our campus, they're on campuses around the country. Another recent executive order that has been impacting higher education is the executive order on the travel ban. To provide context, I just wanted to provide a little bit of information on the economic benefits of foreign students to our economy. In Florida, 36,249 foreign students contributed $1.1 billion to the state's economy in tuition, fees, and living expenses. Foreign students contribute to Florida's metropolitan areas from 2008 to 2012 and paid $423 million in tuition and $258 million in living costs in Miami and Fort Lauderdale alone. So there's a significant economic impact to foreign students. This recent travel ban caused a lot of disruption to both faculty and foreign students who now no longer are certain that they will be able to enter the United States, remain in the United States, or leave if they are from some of the impacted countries. Foreign students also contribute to the innovation in Florida. In 2009, non-resident aliens comprised 38.6% of master's degrees and 52.9% of doctorate degrees in science, technology, engineering, and math. The number of immigrants in Florida with a college degree has increased by 70.7% between 2000 and 2011, according to the data from the Migration Policy Institute. And in Florida, 27.3% of foreign-born persons who were naturalized as U.S. citizens had a bachelor's degree or higher. At the same time, only 19% of naturalized citizens lacked a high school diploma, compared to 30.7% of non-citizens, and 19.8% of non-citizens have a bachelor's degree. So immigrants are playing a significant role in our systems of higher education, and they're taking advantage of the opportunities that they have. It's been a great era also for immigrant entrepreneurs in the United States, with their numbers increasing for decades. Immigrants accounted for 18% of all self-employed people in 2014. And in Florida, they contribute, foreign-born individuals own 26.9% of new and small businesses. It's a significant impact on the economy. The recent executive orders, border security and immigration enforcement, and enhancing public safety in the interior, both signed on January 25, 2017, had a significant chilling effect on those DACA recipients that we talked about and their fear. Many of them, I have heard reports from different universities and colleges are not going to school, are staying home, are afraid to go out of their homes. Here in Jacksonville this week, we heard stories of raids on immigrants on Atlantic Boulevard, Beach Boulevard, and in St. Augustine. We have recently received permission to go out to a new 700-bed immigrant detention facility in Folkston, Georgia, which is about an hour from here. So clinical students will be going out with me, will be interviewing and providing legal information to immigrants detained in these facilities. The executive order signed by President Trump on January 27, protecting the nation from foreign terrorist entry into the United States, also known as the travel ban, also had a significant impact. Schools across the country have current students who were worried that they won't be allowed back in the U.S., or that if they leave, prospective students may not be allowed in at all. And these are individuals who already had been screened and who already had visas. And all faculty, also faculty who are from the banned countries, fear they'll be denied re-entry if they try to visit family members or relatives outside the country. Currently, the Ninth Circuit has placed the case on hold, and there's a temporary restraining order, and the case is on hold while the President redrafts the executive order. But it'll be important for institutions of higher education to be involved in the conversation and make sure that the impact on colleges, universities, and students and faculty is taken into consideration. Additionally, the impact of the executive orders on security and immigration enforcement caused this increased fear among DACA recipients and undocumented students, and also students from mixed status families. I know that we have many students at Florida Coastal and many students in our community who have family members who are undocumented. It's very difficult to study and focus on your school when you're worried that someone from your family might face deportation. So all of these things are providing a backdrop to this current situation with immigrants. The one positive light at the end of this rather difficult time for immigrants in education is this unprecedented response. And I, just here in the clinics, have had more students reach out to me to see how they can get involved and private attorneys than ever in my career. And that is really inspiring. And another aspect is many members of our community have asked for presentations on immigration. What is it? What are the rules? What is the history? How are we where we are, and what does it mean to be a U.S. citizen or lawful resident? So this is a lawful permanent resident. So this is a time for education. It's a time for immigrants to tell their story. It's an opportunity as well as a significant challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Curran. We are now ready for our first panel discussion. In addition to Professor Curran, we have Professor Christopher Roederer, as well as student Mia Jekyll. Christopher Roederer is a professor of law and director of international programs here at Florida Coastal, where he has taught constitutional law, numerous courses in international and comparative law, and various other courses for the last 12 years. As a side note, he was my constitutional law professor about 12 years ago, maybe. I think I was one of his first students here at Florida Coastal. He is an honorary senior research fellow at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa and was a Fulbright scholar there in 2012. He has taught courses in 7 different countries and published extensively on constitutional law, legal theory, delict, torts, human rights, and democracy. During law school, Professor Roederer was the legal theory editor on the New York University Review of Law and Social Change. Professor Roederer is the author of numerous scholarly articles, as well as law school textbooks, including Constitutional Powers and Mastering Constitutional Law, as well as numerous book chapters. Our other presenter, student Mia Jekyll, is a third-year law student here at Florida Coastal. She graduated summa cum laude from the University of South Carolina, upstate, with a degree in corporate fitness, where she attended on both a soccer and cross-country scholarship. She later earned a Master's of Science degree from California University of Pennsylvania. Prior to coming to law school, she worked for 8 years in the education and wellness field, including 2 years at an institute of higher education. Mia is currently the Vice President of External Competitions for the Moot Court Program, a staff editor on the Law Review, and is at the top of the class. Mia's article, The 1990 Amendments to the Immigration and Naturalization Act, Resolving a Race to the Courthouse or Creating Omnipotent Power, was selected for publication in Florida Coastal Law Review's Summer Symposium Journal. Our panelists will be discussing immigration reform and its impact on education. We're going to ask them each to take a few minutes to discuss their input on this topic, and then once they've done that, we'll open up for questions from the audience, and we can start with Ms. Jekyll. Whatever you prefer.
Thank you for that great introduction. The article that I wrote that we published in the Summer Journal was essentially looking at the legal aspect towards becoming a naturalized citizen. And it really looked at the interplay between 2 statutes, 8 U.S.C. 1421C, which is commonly referred to as the authority statute, gives the district courts the authority to review denied applications for naturalization. So this is significant because once the application is denied, the district courts actually get de novo review to look at whether that was an appropriate action or not. The other statute that some of the circuits have deemed to be in conflict is 8 U.S.C. 1429, which is the statute. And this statute gives the Attorney General the exclusive power to naturalize. However, it says that once removal proceedings have been initiated, the Attorney General can no longer naturalize an individual. So the interplay between this is whether or not once a removal proceedings have been initiated, whether that's just the district courts of their de novo review. The article goes into the circuit split, and it's significant for 2 reasons, and one of them I think has a direct impact on what we're discussing today, which is higher education. So obviously, one aspect is giving one individual exclusive power within the naturalization and removal proceedings, because the Attorney General the only person to be naturalized. So under the circuits that say that the initiation of removal proceedings, it strips the district courts of their de novo review, what in effect could happen is that at the time the Attorney General denies naturalization, an application for naturalization, if the attorney then immediately initiates removal proceedings, that individual is completely stripped of any judicial review. So that gives the one individual a huge amount of power. This is a second issue that is a major one that we're facing is that there is a circuit split on this, meaning that different circuits are applying the interplay between the two statutes separately. So some of the circuits are allowing judicial review even though the removal proceedings have been initiated and other circuits are not. James Madison, Federalist Papers 42, said that if we're going to be united in any sense, it clearly ought to be in relation to other nations. And I think that those words echoing back to what we're looking at in the educational realm. So right now, in 2014, 2015, we had over 300,000 American students getting educational credit at universities overseas. We also had over 1 million immigrants that same year at our colleges and universities here within the nation. Not only is the effect of immigration on our colleges and educations here within our borders and removing the diversity that we get with having professors who might be of immigrant background and what they're contributing to us, the research that's being contributed to us, and then being in classrooms with students who have completely different experiences and backgrounds in life. But if we're no longer allowing them to go to our schools, it follows that other nations are going to act similarly towards us. So the fact that we would likely be stripping our students of the abilities to go get educations overseas. Most colleges and universities have study abroad programs. And if we're not going to be educating immigrants or people from other countries, and it's a slippery slope, you know, where does it stop? And what makes us think that we're still going to have those opportunities to go abroad and learn? So I think that the opportunity to learn from each other is something that is it's priceless. So first of all, we have to get on the same page. And I was speaking to somebody recently within the past 2 weeks, and they were when the executive order was first released, and different federal courts were putting stays on it or not, and there was actually individuals who had to change their port of, they were arriving to America because they had been on vacation, and they had to change the airport that they were coming into the nation on because one state would have allowed them and the other state would not have. So first of all, we have to get all on the same page, but then we have to really look at the bigger picture.
So where do I start? Let's make America great again. So how do we do that? We do it by closing down our borders, right? By fear-mongering, blaming Mexicans for all our problems, blaming Muslims for our other problems. Now, part of the problem in America is that we're all delicate snowflakes, right? Recent law review articles and conferences have focused on the fact that campuses, you have all these minorities and women complaining and saying that they're being harassed by the language of people like Trump, President Trump, his somewhat sexist, racist, bigoted language, right, which he celebrates, and which perhaps won him the election, at least in part. But it's not just those minorities and women that are delicate snowflakes that are complaining that want safe spaces, right? Clearly, President Trump and the folks who voted for him also want safe places. They want places where they don't have to hear from minorities, where they can scream and shout and blame everybody else for all their problems. And that's how we're supposed to make America great again. America is great. We're supposed to be the #1 country in the world. We're supposed to be the best, the brightest, the hardest working, the most innovative. And, as my other panelists have mentioned, that's largely because of immigrants, right? Not to say that our indigenous population hasn't done amazing, wonderful things, but a lot of what America is immigrants, for better or worse, for those who lived here before. And so, part of the problem with the executive order, I'll talk briefly about that. Some of you may or may not know, right from the bio, that I'm an immigrant. I'm not an immigrant to the United States. I was born in Kansas. But I spent a good deal of my professional life, like the first 10 years, overseas, working overseas. I immigrated to Prague shortly after the fall of the Soviet Union, so that I could be part of a wave of Americans going over there thinking that we should share our knowledge and our views about what makes America great with people in Prague, and to exploit the newfound capitalism over there. I didn't do much of that. I was a teacher making, I think, about $10,000 a year. But then I immigrated again to Papua New Guinea. They let me in for some reason. Right? And then to South Africa, where I'm probably still on the books of permanent resident. I've grown, it's hard to believe for those of you who know me, I've grown enormously through that experience, through the benefits that I've received educationally, culturally, and so on from all these people throughout the world. And if, the answer is shutting down and closing people off, blaming other people for our problems, I just don't see us getting greater or better, right? I like to see us making the world great again, and seeing us as part of making the world great again, and not somehow thinking that we need to make ourselves great by showing how other people are worse or less, or somehow not up to our particularly odd standards for what it means to be great. Now, the executive order that President Trump passed, has all the signs of all these problems, right? It was passed, by him, right? With very little thought to its effect on a broad range of people. It largely failed in Washington, which resulted in the nationwide ban, because no consideration for due process for all those academics, all those students that, as we see, are in the United States studying, all those professors who are here, who didn't want to come, go home, go away to conferences, right? I'm traveling to Budapest this summer. I'm hoping to go to Sarajevo, which is a predominantly Muslim country itself. And then to France, where, things are all wonderful and nice. And hopefully I'll be warmly received there. Maybe not. We'll see. But there was no consideration for the due process rights of those people living here, people coming here, refugees, or people that have already come through the process, or started all the process to get in those lines that are very hard to get in, to come over and visit, to study, to research, and so on. And that's not even just to mention the fact that it has this horrible taint of bigotry behind it, right? With the pledge, the campaign pledge to ban all Muslims, right? Which, was not actually brought up all that much in the decision of some of these courses. They never got there. But you also have this real taint. And then, of course, the conversation with Giuliani about how do we get this thing that's bigotry writ large, which obviously could not have passed constitutional muster, right? Because it just reeks of animus towards a group based on their religion, how do we somehow water that down and make it past some kind of scrutiny? Right? So you choose a couple of countries, right? And then you have this radically overbroad, complete ban, right? Which ends up banning people who helped our soldiers in Iraq, right? As well as academics and students and minority religious groups and other people persecuted in these places that in some parts were partly responsible, right? We're responsible for the turmoil and the instability in lots of these places to more or less degrees. And so those bans were way overbroad. And then they're also way under-inclusive, right? If we're talking about the threat, right, the largest threat to America is, of course, Americans. And if you really want to do a ban, try to get us all to travel overseas, then just don't let us back in, right? Let some people from other countries in, and maybe it'll be a safer place. So, but I'm happy to take any questions about the due process problems, the religious discrimination problems with the ban, and of course the whole issue of standing, which is a very exciting constitutional issue. Where does Washington State get off? Saying that it somehow is a right to sue the president to stop the president from this executive order. Well, it's based on all those harms to all of its students and its faculty, to its institutions of higher education. And so that's where they got the standing, not to raise their own constitutional claims, but to raise the claims of those people who work for them, who come to study there, who are stuck outside the country, can't travel, can't research, can't expand their knowledge, can't go back and share the knowledge that they gained about how great this country is with the people back in their own countries, right? We've closed that off and we've made ourselves a less wonderful, less great, crappy little rinky-dink, closed-minded country. And that makes me sad.
Well, I obviously had an opportunity to share my views, but I think one of the things for me that, I was a Rotary exchange student in high school, and they tell you where to go. I spent a year and a half in Denmark, and I learned Danish, which has not proved to be particularly useful as a foreign language. But one of the things that I learned when I was in that experience was that when you are learning another language, you start to become almost like a different person because you cannot translate things literally, but there's a part of your brain that opens up, the way that you are, your personality, everything expands. And those intercultural experiences that we have, interacting with foreign students and ourselves, traveling, just really make us richer, deeper individuals. And recently there have been scientific studies that show that individuals who speak more than one language are more flexible, have a less likelihood of getting Alzheimer's disease, and other impacts on the brain, that we really grow and are richer when we are having these cross-cultural interactions and expanding our language abilities. And this is why it's so important that we have diversity in immigration that's related to education, especially in higher education. I personally think everyone shouldn't just take a foreign language, but you should be immersed in it. If you live in Europe, if you live in other parts of the world where you don't have a choice, because if you live in Denmark, you can't just speak Danish, you have to speak English or German or something else so that you can interact with the rest of the world. And by being over here and in the place of dominance, linguistically, we don't have to challenge ourselves in that way. And I think it does present narrowness, and it's going to impact our future great ideas and concerns.
And you kind of say it's humbling, right? It's, obviously, I'm going to have Alzheimer's and I'm not very flexible. And all those places I've been, I never could master a language. So I was always on the outside, trying to learn enough over beer.
Are there any questions from the audience for any of our panelists?
All of this stuff sounds fantastic, and all that stuff, but if I'm looking on, the flip side, like when you go to an airport, people pat their hands all over you, terrible intrusion of my rights and stuff like that, and with the homeless population, 95% of them are fantastic people, but some of them, have some sort of issues that kind of diminish or put some sort of perspective that in our minds. But so isn't there also on the flip side, the public safety thing? Because if it's not, then everything they're doing looks essentially idiotic because there's no point.
Well, so one thing that I think is important is a lot of the things in the executive order, and experts would disagree, but the grounds of inadmissibility for coming into the United States have not changed, and they include threat to national security. They include all of those things that are the undesirable individuals that you don't want coming. I think everybody wants security. I don't know anybody who doesn't, but I think the question comes into play. Are we already doing that? Are we doing it sufficiently? And do we need to change it and target specific populations in that way as a group? Or is it more effective to have finite, specific security checks for individuals? And there's a lot of experts in the field that think that, that we already were doing that. And that this executive order didn't really structurally work either. So it's very difficult to get into the United States, and refugees in particular. I was, last year we did a presentation on this with the security checks because I represent refugees take years. It takes years for refugees to get here. So there are other types of immigrant visas where it's a little easier and interviews our way, but the refugee population, no one is scrutinized at a great level. So
Even people from those 7 countries that were banned, right? They have had to go through extra screening and interviews before this ban. So it wasn't like you just get to come over, no visa, no interview, or whatever. It's not easy. It happens from South Africa that I've tried to petition to come over that haven't been able to come over to visit me. And that's from South Africa. It's not even on the list, right? These aren't particularly dangerous people. Well, except, friends of mine.
Any other questions? Yes.
Quick question. So, unlawful immigrants have been coming to America since 1492, essentially. Obviously what we have in place isn't working. What would you suggest is a good fix for our current immigration system? Obviously it sounds like Ellis Island was the better policy than what we have now. Besides us going out and calling our legislators, what do you think we could do as students and future lawyers to fix the immigration system?
Well, I think understanding how it currently works is really key, because that's what I've seen from a lot of our politicians and a lot of our legal experts is that there's a lack of expertise in this area. You can't understand how to fix something. You don't understand what it is and what's wrong with it. But I also think there have been several comprehensive immigration reform proposals, and you're going to have to make compromise. But I think we do have a working system. We don't have the right visas for the right number of jobs and types, and we're falling behind in STEM fields. And so I do feel like we need a comprehensive package. And I do believe that everybody can come in kind of person, because I think we're far too gone for that internationally. But I will say that we also need to invest more, particularly in fixing problems in our neighboring countries. In our community, in Florida, the influx of children, women, individuals fleeing Central American countries has gone astronomically. And these aren't necessarily, they're forced migrants. They're not people that necessarily want to leave their countries by choice, but because they're escaping horrific situations. And I think we need to do more to work with our neighbors to make it so that individuals can stay safely where they are. The American Immigration Lawyers Association and the Migration Policy Institute have really great literature for this, and you can want to follow-up on comprehensive immigration reform options and some of the things that have been proposed in the past, bipartisan.
Was there going to be a case there?
I know we talked about the Ninth Circuit weighing in on the executive order, and just what you talked about, circuit split regarding these two laws. Do y'all think that a circuit split with other potential executive orders, potential immigration law, will that affect things moving forward? I think that any time that we're dealing with something as large as immigration, a circuit split is highly detrimental to our system, just because it shouldn't, you're not coming into, at state, you're coming into a country, and it shouldn't be dependent upon which airport you're flying into, or which avenue, which port your boat is coming into, or which border you're crossing, as far as how the laws play out. We are a United States of America, and I think that we have to have a uniform front, if for no other reason, so that people have an expectation of what their rights are and what they can expect as far as being able to come into the country.
There was a circuit split when the Washington decision, right? So Boston had held the executive order, but most other district courts had enjoined, but those injunctions were local, not national. So the Washington injunction was nationwide, and the Obama administration tried to argue that it shouldn't have been. But of course, when students and faculty have to fly out of any number of airports, flying east and west, and south or north-ish over the borders, they determined that it didn't make any sense not to have a nationwide injunction, because the harm to the students and faculty at the University of Washington and the other Washington State University system and schools could continue.
Any question? Yes, sir.
We talked for a second about the almost ability for illegal immigrants to not really have due process and the process of them being removed from the United States. Do you believe that we need to create some constitutional extensions for illegal immigrants to give them some form of process to possibly fight the removal? Or, should we extend constitutional rights to them? This is my question.
Yeah, we do have due process rights once they're in the country, and I think that the challenge is when you're outside of the country. And I know for the cases that I've been involved in working on, part of the problem has been, figuring out how to intervene overseas, and even the visas that should have been reinstated. We haven't been able to get all of those reinstated to get people in, because that's what, at least on the ground, immigration attorneys are trying to do, is move quickly before the executive order is rewritten, so that we get people back. Because once you're in, you're going to have access to removal proceedings in most circumstances. So you would be able to go before a judge when you're out, knocking on our door. You don't have the same right.
And so part of the problem with the executive order is that if you're a student or a four-year program, right, and you're studying and you're in the middle of that, and you want to go back home for the holidays, to be with your family, well, when you try to come back in, no process, right? And of course, the executive order said there could be waivers and things, and then they changed the order a number of times in terms of who they would ban or who they wouldn't, although it wasn't the president who changed it. So there's a question of whether they can just change their mind again about how they then enforce this order. So the enforcement of the order is unclear, it's vague, it's somewhat arbitrary, arguably, and it's very difficult to know what your rights might be, because even Americans, right, should know this. When you leave and you want to come back, you also lose a lot of your constitutional rights when you're trying to come back into the country. They can seize your laptop, they can keep it for months and go through it and then give it back to you eventually, right? You have a lot less rights for international travel than you do for internal traffic. And of course, immigrants in these removal proceedings have never been given full criminal due process, right? Because even though they're detained in prisons, jails, or detention facilities, these facilities, if you've been out to Baker or any of these other places, they're not the Hilton or Holiday Inn or
That would be cheaper, though.
right. These are prisons, right? But there's no criminal due process rights for those folks, even though the consequences feel a lot like criminal punishment. I personally think that detention, right, because they're put in detention, should be treated as a criminal process issue myself.
And a lot of the facilities you're citing are privately owned corporations, so they're for-profit industries. And it is estimated $142.79 a day in the state of Florida to house an immigrant. So you really could stay at the Hilton in hot wire.
You have a question? Yes, sir.
Professor Curran, with the immigration clinic, obviously a lot of stuff has been about this over the last semester. What's like the most common problem in Jacksonville more specifically with regard to the regulations and access?
So, an absolute decimation of the refugees resettlement program, in my opinion, is there are two things. There are these raids going on, enforcement actions going on, which has tossed a lot of communities into absolute fear of people staying home, not going to school, not sending their children to public elementary school. And several clients say they weren't sending their kids to school who are U.S. citizens because the family is afraid to go out the door. That's significant locally, but also with one of the parts of the executive orders, we reduced the number of refugees we were resettling from 110,000 to 50,000. And that took all the funding away from the refugee resettlement programs. And so all of my colleagues and partners in the community with our clinic lost their jobs yesterday. So I think over 22 refugee service providers in Jacksonville. We are one of the larger refugee resettlement cities in Florida. We have even though it's a geographically very large city and it's hard to find people here, there are lots of different immigrant communities and they've lost their advocates and possibly permanently. So that I think is going to be devastating to infrastructure refugee resettlement long term.
Yes, sir.
Your thoughts on how a change in congressional term limits can reinforce our separation of powers and maybe give the people a voice, how that can have an effect on legislative branch?
I think it would be great if there was congressional term limits. I think it's in some ways ridiculous the president can only serve 2 terms. But you have these Congress folks who have effectively, particularly in the House, where you have most of the elections are gerrymandered, right? Most of the elections, you know who's going to win based on their party because of the way the district is drawn. So the election's almost foregone before it starts, right? And particularly if you've been in that position for numerous years, then of course you have seniority, you can get more things done, you get to be on committees and everything else, and so then you just get entrenched, right? And so you have these people that are in these positions. It's almost like an aristocracy, or they're almost guaranteed those positions indefinitely until maybe the other party gets elected and then redraft the district. And then you might, after 20, 30, 40 years, be in jeopardy somehow. But I think it would be great to have term limits. You'd have, a bigger turnover in those bodies. People would be less entrenched. They would see it less as a privilege or a right almost. And maybe they'd start serving their constituencies better. I think it would be great.
We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back with our next